Okay, if we can resume, please. Okay, so I think before we jump to considering the bus lane and park and ride, we were at, I think, page 12 on the agenda, and, we're moving page 12 in your versions. 5.7, question 5.7, does the Air Quality Action Plan require updating? If so, when will that be done? The Council responded it is currently being updated. And recent work in the Environmental Protection Team suggested that a smaller area might be appropriate, smaller air quality management area might be appropriate when looking at current and up-to-date evidence. I take it that the idea is that might be focusing then on the exceedance areas rather than the whole town approach. If the focus is going to be on getting the levels down below EU limits, it seems logical to concentrate on the areas where they're exceeded. Then there's a question about the draft low emission strategy. Which did itself point to a need to update the Air Quality Action Plan. And there's a question about the reason justification to policy DM5, which I think we've already covered. Then integrated transport strategy. And reference to two of the objectives of that. One, to enhance and encourage sustainable travel choices, including the development, maintenance and enhancement of public transport provision, including park and ride. Although no additional park and ride provision is proposed, we've just had a discussion about that. Objective 4, reducing the air quality impacts of transport. The strategy quotes examples of successful modal shift in other towns and public transport actions, including improving bus frequencies, bus priority measures on strategic routes. And then, amongst other measures, it says it seeks to control demand for parking in the town centre by increasing parking charges by 50%. But this would apply only to long-stay parking and to be implemented by 2031, which is some 15 years in the future. And the commitment also to maintain the current level of parking provision in the town centre. The transport session, there was an indication that in the transport modelling suggests there's already sufficient parking capacity in the town centre to support a significant increase in vehicle flows. And I think elsewhere there have been some conclusions that, notwithstanding what some people have said about parking, that there actually is a potentially an oversupply of parking relative to the amount that's actually used in the town centre. I know that I think last time I came in to the town centre, I think at 9 in the morning, I was surprised to find that the Lock Meadow car park was completely empty at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's one of that's the largest long-stay car park in the town centre. Yet it only seems to be used for kind of evening use in cinemas and things like that, rather than doesn't seem to serve as a long-stay parking in the way you might expect. But it's 5%. And also looking at the parking strategy, I think 5 years ago, when the parking survey was done, the all-day parking in the town centre was £4.50, and now it's £6 on site. So there's been a 33% increase in parking within the last 5 years. So to say it's going to increase by 50% over 15 years doesn't look very ambitious. And is it actually going to have any real effect on people's choices? Wouldn't a more logical measure be to actually link it, if you're trying to achieve modal shift, to actually be some link between what it costs to park and what it costs to travel by bus? That seems to be the way that would like to influence choices. Mr. Thompson.
Andrew will Mr. Thompson will provide more detail. But in terms of modal shift, yes, I would agree with you, Mr. Paller, as an approach. But as you know, two of the largest, perhaps the largest car parks in Maidstone Town Centre are privately run. The very large Fremlins car park, which is very accessible. As you probably know, you come straight off Fairmeadow, the dual carriageway.
They already charge a lot more. They already charge £8 or £9, I think, for long stay parking.
Yes, in a highly accessible location. We try, and the MAL, Capital and Regional, also, as you know, have a multi-storey car park. From a corporate perspective, obviously, we have to be competitive with those two car parks in particular. So we try to, in very simple terms, not to be uncompetitive. I do appreciate the Fremlins is a higher rate, but I'd say it's
presumably they have a higher rate because they actually don't want people parking all day in their car park. They want people to be able to come in easily and shop and go home.
When I deal with retailers, they talk a lot about dwell time. Yes, they like people to shop, have a cup of coffee, have a meal, shop again, then go back home. And you can see this happening in Bluewater. I think a lot of retailers want people, to be there for 4 or 5 hours because they'll be spending more money.
Well, up to that, it's on the short-term rates, it's the long-term rates, the all-day parking rates, which it's expanded.
Yeah, this is one of the discussions which is ongoing with our parking services manager, is possibly looking at changing the definitions of what we mean by long stay parking, short stay parking. Because I think that the nature of retailing in particular is changing.
Ms. Cooling.
In a mixed market, I really cannot understand any argument why the borough-owned car park should be cheaper than private. If anything, you should lead everyone upwards if you're into this modal shift, which I don't go along with. But you should not be a cost cutter. You should be a premium.
Okay. Well, in any case, that's it's in the strategy rather than the local plan as such. So, the council said that they're planning to increase long stay charges tomorrow by 8.3%. So I think it's 50p presumably. I think that's 50p on £6 or something like that. And then and there are some sites in the plan which are earmarked for other development. So, but that seems to, on the one hand, say that the strategy says you're going to maintain the number of parking spaces, but at the local plan saying some sites are earmarked for development. So that doesn't seem to tie up unless you're planning to create new car parks.
Certainly a lot of truth in that. On sites where we've looked to retain some of the existing car parking, there is a clear policy criteria within that site policy. For the sites that are listed in the response, that criteria is not there. The proposed redevelopment, as approved by SPST committee and by full council for submission, was full redevelopment of these sites, in effect losing the car parking provision.
So it isn't the case that when you actually get an application or a proposal coming forward that them say, well, yeah, but our strategy says we're not going to reduce these car parks, we're going to keep these car parks. So we shouldn't be approving this.
Yeah, these are clearly sites that feed into our local plans for housing supply.
Ms. Cooling.
Just an observation. Your observation on Fairmeadow Car Park, understood. how many retail activities during the day are there? The answer is not many at all. Whereas if you go to the other side of the Bridge Gyratory on St Peter Street, you've got a lot of retail complexes there, and if you can get a car park space, you're doing extremely well. And by the way, if you want to come into the town centre because you want to do some serious shopping, then trying to find one in the centre of Maidstone has been a problem for years.
Okay, anything else? I mean, already commented on the park and ride charges. Is that based on experience that essentially, unless you have the park and ride charges that much cheaper than both town centre parking and bus fares, then people won't use the park and ride?
Yeah, obviously we've looked at other park and rides in operation, such as Canterbury and further afield. Yeah, that's the general philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Right, so I think I want to review the basically local plan representations referring to air quality impacts, often related to objections to an increase in congestion. But then the government's clear its objective is to actually decouple growth and pollution, saying that essentially pollution, the answer to pollution is not simply to have no growth. And the council's produces document says gridlock without growth without gridlock and so on. And I haven't seen that those who are saying that we shouldn't have the development saying how you provide for development elsewhere without having the same effects. I mean, if you, the options essentially for developing elsewhere. First of all, is developing elsewhere in Maidstone Borough, so which means either adding on somewhere else to Maidstone Town, further developments in the villages, or new villages. Those are any other options to those. The new villages, people still have to get to the services somewhere. So they've got to get to existing villages expansion. You've got to get to the main services operated in Maidstone Town. So and so that helps. Beyond that, it's you're talking about development in other areas, in other boroughs, and again, people haven't really pointed to which other boroughs you get your growth without having the same air quality problems. Mr. Cooling.
I haven't looked at Tunbridge and Malling air quality problems in anywhere near the depth of here, but as we reported in another session, the document that's come out from Tunbridge and Malling, which is broadly scoping the situation, they identified potential sites totaling 10,000, but only need 6. Therefore, they've got a FAT of 4,000. So at minimum, and I don't know the air quality implications, at minimum, we should be through duty to cooperate, tackling Tunbridge and Malling on this. But I think for the coordinating team, I will say it again, we don't believe the OHN, and I believe as and when it gets to the plan review, we will, if we're still in existence, we will be tackling that from day one, because there'll be new population statistics, etc. But air quality from this morning would appear to be a severe constraint for this borough. And if a constraint isn't allowed to reduce OHN, I think, and I've seen it in some KCC papers, if I recollect, there should at least be grounds for some sort of pause until the situation is clarified, and literally the air is clarified, because otherwise this plan is going to be, in a non-legal sense, it's going to be unsound, because on the one hand, Maidstone Borough is likely to be continuing in breach of air quality regulations. And so if it tries to cure that by not building, it's going to be in breach of government policy on OHM. So there's a clear conflict which you, Mr. Inspector, have to somehow adjudicate on. The plan cannot do both. It cannot get us to a strategic plan for compliance with air quality and with housing as required by government. There's a basic conflict. And I think the only way we can see through it, and I've seen it echoed, I'm sure, by a KCC, is that in the really offending parts of the borough, it's not to say the sites should never be developed, excuse me, but there should be a pause until air quality is really understood somewhat greater than it is now. This working group that's been put together by the borough, a new one, I don't know who I'm being disrespectful towards amongst the members on that, but I see no air quality experts. And I mentioned two councillors who I know have spoken on air quality, Councillor Prendergast, who happens still to be here, and Councillor Eddie Powell. Neither of those are on the committee. And so that committee is a fig leaf. We've used that expression before on the Statement of Common Ground with KCC. Another fig leaf, this committee. How coincidental that it came into being not long ago. How coincidental that it's meeting today. This plan is unsound because there's a basic conflict between getting our residents the air quality that they need, the EU says they need, and this borough actually providing the number of houses that the government says it wants. By the time we get to local plan update, who knows where the population projections will go? And that would be a time after a pause to review whether it's full steam ahead or what. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, just on the Tonbridge and Malling point, I mean, I think it was, you've said before, and others have said, that essentially functionally the eastern part of Tonbridge and Malling operates as part of the Maidstone urban area, so that if you build in Tonbridge and Malling, they still will be travelling into and out of Maidstone. So you don't really deal with the traffic issue that way. You're just coming down a different road.
That's an absolutely fair point. Am I trying to kick this problem into some other area? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. But this borough needs a sound plan that serves its residents. This one has got a basic conflict. If Tonbridge and Malling can't sort it out, and for years, Tonbridge and Malling, they've said they've got this problem with this area, therefore there's a lot of development towards the Maidstone boundary. Mm-hmm. I haven't looked at it in detail, but that will be their problem. Our problem is we have a plan which is either fundamentally illegal against EU directives or is breaching government policy on objectively assessed housing need if we say some of the development shouldn't happen so that air quality's got a chance to catch up. There's a conflict.
Okay, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's pretty important to point out that the exceedances are there if development does or does not happen. They already exist. The development putting forward will ensure that we mitigate the impacts of that development on air quality. But more than that, through measures to support modal shift, we are seeking to introduce benefits to improve air quality. Indeed, the scheme to introduce a bus lane or extend the bus lane on the A274 Sutton Road is actually part of the 2010 action plan. So they're mutually supportive.
There's always a problem with the word mitigate. It's eye of the beholder, as we keep saying, and it could be 0.1% mitigation or it could be 100% mitigation. What we're looking for in air quality, and thank you, Mr. Inspector, for bringing this session into being, What we're looking for is no worsening, i.e. 100% mitigation, i.e. cancellation, and by the way, some sort of plan that is then going to allow this borough to get into accordance with the EU directives. Even if we're outside the EU, I bet they will persist because they're basic health and safety.
Okay. Well, that, I think, comes on to the next question, 5.10. Says, does what the High Court describes as the urgent need for measures to address the current infraction of nitrogen dioxide pollutant limits require more radical measures to encourage modal shift for journeys into Maidstone town centre, so as to reduce the number of vehicles entering the town from both existing and proposed developments? So the Council, in its response, has acknowledged the High Court has recognised the urgent need to address the infraction, and is concerned about the refusal of the County Council to implement measures which would support air quality objectives, and can't see an evidence-based reason to delay implementing those measures longer. And further, so that many of the measures the Borough Council wants to implement are summarised in a high-level manner in the emerging local transport plan and reflective of wider objectives in that document. The County Council's response is again, what I said this morning about this seeking a strategic approach and not an uncoordinated piecemeal approach to development, which I think is very unlikely to achieve meaningful changes in travel patterns, not in the interest of existing communities and travelling public. It's imperative that major development in the most constrained part of Maidstone in the south east does not come forward in advance of the 2022 review due to severe impact on congestion. A review will enable a wide range of transport options to be fully considered, including those offering scope to facilitate genuine modal shift. According to the team, we don't believe modal shift is the answer. Much more modal shift not feasible given the backward steps on park and ride. So for buses to be the answer, there must be infrastructure and facilities for them to operate effectively from the perspective of users of the service. And this isn't present in Maidstone, nor will measures proposed in the plan be effective. Okay, I think we'll, if I ask you to comment on that, we're simply repeating things that have already been said this morning. Ms. Thomas, you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to remind you that, and I'm sure you know this, that Maidstone Borough Council do not control most of the infrastructure projects. Mm-hmm. They are done by other bodies. Mm-hmm. They're either carried out by KCC, or if you're talking about extra rail services, that's South East Rail at the moment, unless they change the franchise. Widening of the roads is a problem which I don't believe is in Maidstone Borough Council's hands. I think it's in Kent County Council's hands. Mm-hmm. So, and certainly buses are in Arriva's hands, and Arriva is a commercial operation, and it will make its decision on what is best for itself, naturally, which may not be the same as what is best for the population of Maidstone. It's a problem where of the infrastructure, I didn't bring it in with me, but the infrastructure delivery plan has 160 projects in it. And of that 160, they're all either critical, essential or desirable in order downwards. And of the critical ones, none are with Maidstone Borough Council, but 40-odd are with Kent County Council. And that bodes ill for this plan because it won't happen if Maidstone has no control over it. And unless it happens, then things like air quality will get worse. It's a problem that is it's part of the local plan that they need to have these things done and are not in control of having it done. And I think that must be part and parcel of the thinking. And when it comes to park and ride, today's car is actually the shopping basket for most places. So people tend to go to the supermarkets, Tesco at Toffel or Sainsbury's in the middle of town, essentially soon, presumably Waitrose down by the A20 at Junction 7. And they won't be going into town. And if town parking prices go up, essentially that's shooting retailers in the foot.
Except you come into town, you park in Sainsbury's and you don't have to pay anything if you as long as you buy something from them.
You don't, no. B&Q and all the others as well, they're free. So in terms of the private parking against borough parking, which is chicken and which is the egg? if Maidstone Borough puts its prices up, private parking will go up in accordance, and vice versa. So it's one of those things that really needs a different strategy to what I've heard this morning.
What is a different strategy then?
I think it's a case of lowering prices of parking in the town centre, keeping as much parking as you can in the town centre, because that's the only way the town centre economics will work. Now, I think I'm right in saying this, that the Fleming Walk Centre has proved attractive. The shopping there has gone up. But I believe it's true, and I read this a while back, so I don't know if it's changed, that the rest of the borough has had a fall in the footfall. It's dropped down. Fleming Walk accounts for the growth in shopping in Maidstone, and we've lost so many major shops. Obviously BHS, but that's a different issue. But things like Thornton's Chocolates and all the little shops are beginning to go away, not coming to Maidstone. So the whole way that the economic development of Maidstone needs to be rethought to overcome some of these problems that originate in planning.
But dropping charges to get more people to drive into the shops, it doesn't do anything to help your congestion or your air quality problems. In fact, rather the reverse.
Yes, it's a difficult balancing act between the two. But I think it's key of most people have the car as their shopping basket for principal shopping. And if you're going to go for clothes, things like that, looking for that, you go to elsewhere rather than go into Maidstone Town Centre.
Yeah. Ms. Cooling.
I think we face the fact that parking is not a uniform market. Some parkers are doing it for work purposes, and they have time constraints on when they go, when they arrive, when they go. Whereas the market that I think my colleague has been referring to is the general economic market, the shoppers in Maidstone. And Maidstone, as we said, has felt, I've lived here 50 years or whatever, it is in decline as an economic centre. And so maybe a more creative approach to parking charges, and I'm making this up as I sit here, where there's a premium on arriving, I'm making it up, before 10 o'clock, or maybe for solicitors 10:30, I didn't say that, and cheaper for those arriving during the middle of the day might help. But the coordinating team is not against modal shift. It will make a contribution, but it's a sense of scale on this whole problem. Air quality, parking, and congestion is not going to go away overnight. And as far as air quality is concerned, this is why we'd like to press for a pause, so that in 3 or 4 years' time, some of the effects of technology, by the way, monitoring effectiveness and technology may be coming through. We may see what this government is doing about diesel, which is now, rather than being God's gift to the motorist 20 years ago, is now the villain. Maybe the government will be having a scrappage scheme. We haven't got a clue. And we don't know how electric cars are going to go. But give it 3 or 4 years, we may start to see the signs of some trends coming through. At the moment, there's a huge fog of statistics. And the one thing we do know, Maidstone's economy is not buoyant. Too many cars, bad air quality. The only thing to do is to have a pause for reflection and analysis. Thank you.
I mean, wouldn't one thing to help the economy of the town centre be to have an increase in population?
A very nice point, darling, touche. Fair point. I understand what you're saying. But as my colleague here said, everything is a balance. And I think that Maidstone has grown substantially. I cannot quote you the figures. My friends across the way may be able to. But Maidstone's population has gone up. I'm making this up as I sit here. 25% over the past 15 years, 20 years maybe. It has gone up. That isn't the answer. It's the quality of the journey into the centre, the quality of the experience when you're here. And this is being slightly disrespectful of some of the retail facilities in Maidstone. And certainly it's how do you park when you get in here? It's a whole combination. There's no panacea, but I certainly don't think, I'm being facetious, Mr. Inspector, on your argument, why don't we build a 500,000 people? I mean, I'm being facetious, please. I think it's time to pause and get a grasp on some of the fundamental strategic problems that Maidstone has relating to traffic and derived from traffic, air quality. Technology may help. Thank you.
So if I could come back on Park and Ride, just a detail in a way. All of Maidstone's did, now the remaining one does, close at 6 o'clock. So I think it was Mr. Thompson who was saying people like to come into Maidstone, do a bit of shopping, have a meal, have a coffee. You can't do that, because if you come into shop and you want a supper in one of the restaurants in Maidstone, you can't use the Park and Ride, because they close at 6 o'clock. And that's something that could be easily changed.
Well, it could be. You have,
like that for a long time.
You have to spend lots of money on empty buses in the evening to do so.
Well, that could be part of the problem, but they actually close them. Yeah. So if you've got your car left in there at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, you have to take a taxi to the Park and Ride.
But the evening parking is very cheap in the town centre, isn't it?
Yes, it's if you come in the middle of the day or the afternoon and you want to stay on for a meal, you can't do it.
Yeah. But you use the bus and you have a drink as well. Yes, or the train. Yeah.
I mean, we've had a few jokes on the subject, but this is probably the most serious issue of the past 10 or 15 years. It's coming to a head through this local plan process. The local plan started off in 2007. I don't know what we'd have said if it had been submitted in 2010 or 11. But now we can see the problems magnified. So this local plan is fairly critical to the status of this borough and the enjoyment of this borough by its residents. I'm sorry, that's why we keep whittering on about this.
Okay. All right. I think everything else we've covered, actually. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else still to cover. So we'll conclude that session and move on to look at the discussion of the plan review.
So could I just ask one point?
Thomas?
I did mention this morning the question of the legality of adding adverse conditions to something that's already bad, and whether that was capable of being taken to court. And I wonder whether Ms. Thomas has actually an answer to that situation. I'm not sure she's listening to me.
Did you hear that?
Sorry, no, sir. I was writing something else.
Okay. I think Ms. Thomas was going back to the question he asked this morning about the legality of approving developments which might make air quality worse. Whether you'd be able to give any further consideration to that.
I haven't got anything to add from this morning.
Right. Okay. Is Mrs. Cooling, yes?
In this very room, I guess it'll be tomorrow. What's the day? Tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening will be the Policy and Resources Committee of this borough. And my apologies. Is that better? In this very room, tomorrow evening, we'll be meeting the Policy and Resources Committee. And one of the agenda items will be their 5-year plan, their financial plan up to 21-22. And doing some analysis of it, the assumed number of new homes over that 5-year period to generate more council tax, and I'm sure it's wrong, but it's roughly right, cumulatively will be 3,433. Whereas the trajectory in the 5-year plan that you're examining is 7,262. Admittedly, there'll be some lag in building until council tax comes through, but this borough doesn't seem to believe its own plan. And it's either doing that because it's incredibly cautious and then making sure all the budget holders and NBC cut to the detriment of residents, or else they truly do not believe their local plan. It can't be both. Thank you. As context.
Does anyone on the council side know the answer to that, or why the figures are different?
There may well be a time lag. I'm not sure. We'd have to look into that. I know the report is being prepared by a separate directorate within the council. It might explain, but we can provide a response.
So the report prepared by
a separate directorate within the council.
A bit more background on that. Allowing for a one-year lag between your building trajectory and when council tax starts coming in. The gap would be the 3433 that's assumed in the papers that will go tomorrow evening, and 5947. It's still about half. There's a big gap. You've either got to believe your plan and budget for it, or you don't believe it and adjust your local plan.
It's tough, Mr. Cooling.
No, apologies.
We can provide you with a report, but just clarification for Mr. Coolin. Is it the medium-term financial strategy report? Okay.
Yes.
Agenda item 13, the medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals 2017-18. All of you budget holders are being hit hard, I'm guessing, over the next 5 years. And all I'm saying is if the budget actually reflected the housing that you're projecting, then your budgets should be a lot freer than they're in prospectively to the benefits of the services in Maidstone.
Is that council tax plus new homes bonus, is it all?
The new homes, no. The new homes bonus is going into capital reserve. I haven't.
Yes, but the
it's just council tax.
Figure, yeah.
Council tax.
New homes bonus is mentioned, retention of business rates, as Mr. Coolin said, general council tax as well.
Yes, you know better than I do the number of strands of revenue you have. Indeed, business rates, retention, that's part of it, council tax, etc. This is what your members, and I'm hoping that all of them will have done the level of analysis that we found time to do to actually challenge the connectedness, if that's a word, between the local plan and your 5-year financial plan.
Okay. Right. I say that we'll manage to produce an agenda for this afternoon session just a couple of days ago, because it's just originally just between myself and the council this session. But the matter we're going to deal with first is on this question of the review of the local plan, which comes as item 2 on this agenda, and the issue is whether there are issues which already suggest the need for an early plan review. Now, the County Council this morning is speaking to what happened on the opening day session. There was the issue that was raised in the action points then was that the Council should consider how to appropriately reference the intended review of the plan, perhaps through a policy. And the Council then responded that they agree there's a need for clarity, and they've proposed in relation to also another a question in hearing session 7. They then propose alternative wording to the text in the submitted plan. So that's proposed change 84. I think things have moved on rather since then. That was just a textual change, which at that time, which said matters which should trigger the consideration review of the local plan or partial review at an earlier date. This is an earlier date than 2022. Changes to national planning policy which could significantly impact on policy of the local plan, or where it accepts a portion of unmet needs from another local authority or to be met by Maidstone Borough Council, or where the output of updates to the Borough Council evidence base will significantly impact on policy of the local plan. But I think I say that lots of more specific matters have come up since then, and there are kind of timetable issues. So that what I've set out on this agenda, a list of those matters which might need to be considered in a plan review, and also because there's intention that the animal monitoring report should cover matters which require cooperation on the duty to cooperate, and these are also could be relevant to that. So I've set out a number of kind of headings there. I'm not saying this is a definitive list, but there are matters which have kind of been highlighted by discussion at other sessions. I think one of those early sessions was that, just run through these, it's a review of the housing need, including impacts of migration from London from adjacent housing market areas. The early sessions were talking about there's some uncertainty about what's going to happen with London migration in the future, and whether it will revive to a higher level than in the recent past, and also how London itself is going to deal with its own needs in its own plan review. Similarly, the adjacent housing market areas, there are some questions raised early in the examination about particularly the effect of any displaced demand from West Kent authorities if they were unable to meet their own needs. And those matters which you know, it's too early to draw any conclusions upon, because their plans are particularly at an earlier stage. So that's one potential matter. Others, there are the plan has identified these broad locations for development, which require will require allocation policies once you get closer to the periods at which development is likely. In the case of Lenham, the ideas have been that there's an opportunity for the Lenham neighbourhood plan to determine where that development might go, but there's also the working up the Invicta and Town Centre sites. And because of likely shortfalls in broad locations compared to what was originally assumed for the delivery of those locations, and also the issues about flood risk at the Syngenta site at Yalding, then there's likely to be a need to identify additional housing for the latter part of the planned period. Another matter which I know the Coordinating Team has been interested in is the question of employment provision and commuting across Maidstone and neighbouring boroughs, and I'm probably going to be I think there's still a bit of work to do before the plan is adopted initially on some of these matters, just to nail down how and where employment provision is going to be made in adjoining boroughs, given the cross-boundary flows. And so that's likely to need some review as well by that period. The matter of the Leeds-Langley Relief Road, the case for that, how it be funded, whether other development will be associated with that road. Alternatives to that relief road, as has been mentioned this morning, that we would need to consider whether there are other ways of achieving the same objectives. Further sustainable transport measures to encourage modal shift to reduce congestion air pollution. On the matter on employment trends, there's still some concern I have about whether particularly office employment is going to be delivered, and if not, how to accommodate other employment. The future of the Syngenta site, if not resolved, a large brownfield site, but with these flood risk issues. Future of the Baltic Wharf site, if not resolved, another large town centre site that may not have a quick solution. And then the opportunity to extend the planned periods to 2036. So there's quite a long list of matters there, all of which I don't think ought to be left to a plan review that commences by 2022. So the question that I pose there is that should there be an actual review policy with a commitment to adoption of the first review by 2021. Well, I said by 1st of April 2021, but that's the changes. So in other words, it's within within 5 years, the work has been done on the plan review sufficiently early to get to be in a position to get adoption by then, so that your 10 years before the end of the present plan period. Mr. Cooling.
Before answering your question on that, this list I think is an excellent list. May I suggest 2 or 3 other things to go in?
Okay.
I would have thought the first bullet might be, given that on current government plans, the so-called Brexit will happen, etc., etc. I would have thought population statistics, a review of population stats and any corrections for the front-end loading in the trajectory.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the view, the plan review, it's going to have to use the latest information that's available then. So
but with appropriate corrections. I mean, we've got this spurt, or whatever you want to call it again now. And the bullet you had first, presumably it's from London and to or from adjacent market areas, just for equivalence. What about checking the windfall profile since the local plan to actually, because we've been pulled apart in terms of our belief in windfalls, there will be a lot more evidence by then.
Well, the windfall is one of the annual monitoring things which there's going to be added into monitoring sessions specifically about that, so that it can be,
Correct me if I'm wrong, the AMR has not been produced for a couple of years, am I wrong?
Well, there was one produced this year.
There was one? Okay,
yes.
I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And then I would have thought we ought to review the gypsy site situation.
Again, there are lots of things which are in the annual monitoring, and those feed in. I mean, there are. I mean, they would need to. There are triggers being imposed in the. Well, explain where you are on the monitoring. We have the monitoring chapter in the plan now,
yes.
And you've seen the agenda I've dropped this afternoon. There's questions about that, but these key monitoring indicators. The Council has actually done a more complete review of that chapter now, with a different set of a different monitoring framework, a larger number of matters, and includes things like, there are things, more specific things on gypsies and windfall, and a whole series of matters, which is suggesting for specific monitoring, and each of those has a kind of trigger for what action to do if the things are going not as planned, essentially.
Yes, and if they've gone whatever above plan means or below plan, whatever that means, presumably the monitoring would give rise to certain revised views from then on. Fair enough. And presumably as a result of today, and you'll tell me that air quality progress and status is being monitored all over the place, it'll be fundamental to take stock of how technology has started to impact on that, government regulation, diesel, this, that and the other. Thank you.
Yes, there's loads of things. Mr. Jarman.
Yes, we're content with this, to have a policy on the review, and the bullet points form in the explanatory text as specific triggers, because, as you said in response to Mr. Cooling, a lot of matters are just, well, I shouldn't say just, but are business as usual. The SNPPs coming out every 2 years, the population projections, check-in windfalls, check-in gypsy supply, for instance. We do that on a monthly basis, so there'll be a lot of things we will just do as a matter of course. And there may well be some trigger arising from our monitoring of those.
Well, I suppose the question is that at what point you say, well, this is going to be a partial review of this matter, this matter, this matter, or whether it's going to be a full plan review. And usually, if you're doing one this early, you wouldn't expect it to be a full review after 5 years, but probably a partial review.
That very point we've been discussing in the office for a few months now. We don't know. To be honest, Mr. Miller, I'd like it to be a partial review. But it might be that all of those are triggered. I don't know. You know, a big one, as you've pointed out, is clarity, future clarity on what's going to happen in London. You know, can London deliver its housing need? Don't know at this point in time. As you pointed out right from the beginning, if it can't, then that would probably lead to some sort of domino effect with Sevenoaks, Tunbridge Wells, various other councils.
I mean, on the obvious thing is, you know, does pressures from that side, does it, as you say, domino effect, does it come into Mason, or is you have to transfer it down to Ashford and what have you? You know?
Well, absolutely, and again, to be honest, we don't know what quantums we're dealing with. Yes, I know that Tunbridge Wells has a lot of green belt, but dare I say it, it also has a certain amount of brownfield sites. And I'm sure Tunbridge Wells in the future will be looking at, you know, getting in more development in the town centre, sort of intensifying the suburbs. You know, today I just don't know the sort of quantums.
And obviously, I mean, if there is some spare capacity in Tunbridge and Morling, then it may transfer into that and not go further. So, yeah. Ms. Cooling.
Again, without answering the direct question on timetable, this team, in its various manifestations, has been in play for 2.5 years, and it's been like drawing teeth on the subjects of windfalls, etc., 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 etc. So may I ask, is ignorance showing? What will be whether this is I guess if it's a full-blown new plan, it goes through Reg 18, 19, or whatever. If it's a partial review, what visibility and when will interested players have on the review? Because if MBC goes out to consultation, they will get 2,000 or 3,000 comments from everyone in the borough, and this is totally disrespectful of the majority of them. If there are that many, then it's easy for the organisation to ignore them, because there'll be some going this way, some going that way, and some the other way. So what will be the status, and do you see any role in that? Will KCC have a sort of a mandated role? Is there any other consultation that could be imposed on a local plan review so that we don't have the issues that we've had over the past 2.5 years? And I would still lay a bet that we wouldn't be talking 18,560 if we'd have been listened to and if the borough had reacted as MPPG permits. So what is this review? What's its status? And when can we get involved?
I mean, well, a review would essentially the process is the same as whether it's a full review or a partial review. It's the same consultation process, the same duty to cooperate requirements, and so on. That they're all. It does make a difference for that. The only difference is the partial review may say, well, this is going to be a view just about housing, or this is a view just about employment, or we're not going to look at the development management policies. We're not going to look at this, and it's just focusing on what does actually need reviewing.
And if we could ask you in your report to consider putting in how deep and wide a review you believe it might need to be, given what you've heard during this examination, that I think would be very helpful. Otherwise, again, being cynical, it could end up that narrow. And to our minds, there are some broad issues here that have come to a head and need to be lanced as issues over the next few years.
I mean, I think the experience of preparing this plan seems to be that it started out as a relatively narrow one, and at each stage, more and more things got added to it. And so it wasn't, so it started as a core strategy, and then it became full local plan, then more allocations, and so on. And that's partly what kind of caused it to take so long. It's that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I mean, I think we'd all agree that the NPPF was a game changer for the. I used to work for the county council. I used to work in the structure plans team. Yes, there was, and I worked in the team. There was a demography team that would come up with populations projections for Kent, and then the strategic team would basically redistribute them. The population growth. Traditionally, sort of the old East Kent coalfield would get more than sort of natural growth. Conversely, areas like Sevenoaks would get less. But then that went, and the responsibility fell to districts and boroughs. So, you know, I know we've had disagreements, but an enormous amount of resources has gone into an evidence base, you know, to hopefully find the plan sound.
May I comment? Yeah. I mean, it's well said. I think, I said earlier today, officers, I think you've got an impossible job. Absolutely. I certainly wouldn't want it. But I must say, I just do not think MPPF was such a huge, from point of view of residents, negative change that suddenly got 500 a year building programme up to 928 or whatever it is. That was because I think at the political level in the borough, there were those who saw the opportunity to renew the P&L account and the balance sheet and so on, and they revised it upwards dramatically, and you've done your professional job to try and go along with that. You've put up options, and the top one more or less has been chosen. But I do believe that if at the review time, with new population statistics, etc., if we're still in existence or still around, we'll be arguing for statistical corrections, and we'll be arguing for windfalls, etc. We'll be like a worn record. And I'm just asking that if a review will be just like this process, then fine. We will have an opportunity. It will be onerous for amateurs, but we will rise to it. But to answer your question directly, Mr. Inspector, in terms of timing, first review by April 2021, that's infinitely better than commencement in 2022. I would ask, and again it's ignorance, what does first review and by whom on the 1st of April 2021 mean?
Well, the review is done by the council, isn't it? Just as the plans are prepared by the council, and then there'll be an examination like this one.
If there's any way you could consider, please, and maybe the county, from a traffic point of view, might wish to support this. I'm being blunt. I think that's far too loose. Is if the council first reviews it in 2021, on current track record, I'm sorry, it'll be 2031 before it's completed. So I would like to suggest that it's, if I'm using the wrong word, forgive me, it's submitted by the 1st of April 2021, which is a hard...
Well, no, adoption is a tougher test than submitted. I mean, submitted would be...
Oh, my apologies. So yes. That's adoption...
This is adoption after examination, this.
As a formal...
Yes.
Formal... Oh, my apologies.
Oh, yes.
My apologies.
No. Okay. Okay, yes, the County Council.
Thank you, sir. From the County Council's perspective, the value of the review is clearly to ensure that development is supported by the necessary infrastructure. So, as we see it, the omission from this list is the need to reconsider the site allocations within the southeastern sector of the town as part of that review, because decisions on their suitability can only be taken once the forms of transport mitigation for that part of the town have been identified. So we would put it to you, sir, that those particular site allocations need to very much form part of that review process.
The problem with that is essentially that you're in that scenario, you're presupposing that the plan will be found unsound now, because that's the only way you could. I mean, if it's a case that the recommendation was to the council to delete one of its main strategic sites, which is what you're sentenced to from this plan, you're talking about a different strategy, and this wouldn't be that you'd need a different plan from now. And I don't think the plan could proceed to adoption on that basis. It would have to be rewritten on that basis, because it'd be such a different plan. So that you wouldn't be talking about a review of a plan, you'd be talking about a new plan.
Potentially. Clearly, it depends on the outcome of the transport mitigation work. That,
Well, no, well,
that,
no,
may,
be-
that may
yeah.
support this distribution
Yes.
strategy,
No,
but we don't know
because,
that yet.
yes. No, because you wouldn't have the transport mitigation work, that further work and the whole study of the relief road and everything else before this plan is adopted. Either you have no plan now, or you'd have a rewritten plan without the South East Maidstone developments. I don't see a scenario in which you'd be going ahead with a completely different plan, and then having a new plan from 2022 onwards with a different scheme. Mr. Hobson.
I'm anticipating the submissions I was going to be making to you in a little while, I think, but we've sort of strayed into this area now. So the situation we're advocating is very similar to that which arose in the Dacorum case, because you had a situation there where the plan in its latter stages was certainly unsound, but the soundness of the plan as a whole was saved on the basis that there would be an effective early review. So the plan was operable for the first period, and there would be a comprehensive review, and that review would obviously produce something that would be effective for the latter half of the plan. And that's what we're urging on you to follow in this instance. That's what's going to be the gist of my submissions.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
So I agree with what some of what Mr. Coolin has said, and sorry to say this, I find it very disappointing that, you know, at a very advanced stage in this examination, Mr. Wright has really said what the KCC's case is. It's to stop H110 or put it on hold. In that scenario, you know, I do wish that we would have been in this chamber a lot earlier. I wish we weren't here in December 2016. Okay, so that part of Maidstone is put on hold. The first thing that happens is the housing developers, who Mr. Coolin, in fairness, came along to, the first thing they'd be saying is, you haven't got a 5-year land supply. So we would be back to planning by appeal. Also, we have spent an awful lot of time trying to come to a statement of common ground with Kent County Council, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, I thought that they were not objecting to development up until 2022. Wouldn't it have been a lot easier to have just said, we agree with you, Maidstone Borough Council, up until 2022, with the exception of H110 or some other sites, and just make it very clear what the difference is?
So the County Council has made its position abundantly clear from day one that further development in southeastern Maidstone is constrained by the lack of infrastructure that has been agreed. There's no agreed infrastructure, and it's that which has caused the difficulty in agreeing a statement of common ground extending beyond the period 2022. And our case has been entirely consistent and enunciated from day one, and we repeat it again today, although it shouldn't be necessary to do so.
Okay. Ms. Thomas.
If I can just come in on that particular point, I would have thought that the mass of letters that have come from Barbara Cooper over at least 2.5 years, stressing this point very, very heavily, in direct contradiction of what you've just said, KCC have been strongly against the increase of 18,560 houses and have made their position quite clear over years. But having said that, what I really wanted to say was this question of the housing supply, we really would look forward to a review of that. One of the problems we have at the moment is that the 18,560 number is a projection of an increase over and above the planned housing numbers for Maidstone over the previous 5 years. It was a very considerable overbuild, and that, of course, means that there's been migration into Maidstone already and I think Hearn actually identified it. So when we project the numbers forward, you're projecting migration is involved in that figure. And I work out that the increase in life expectancy within the current population of Maidstone will, of course, need more dwellings, but I can't make it come out much above 5,000 houses, which means that at the moment, and this needs to be reviewed very carefully, 18,560 less 5,000 in round figures means that we've got about 13,500 people coming into the borough. Mm-hmm. Now, where are they going to come from? I suspect that the majority of that large number will actually be coming from London already. Yeah. So to look at even more from London is, in fact, to perhaps put yourself in a difficult position. It's already been accomplished that we've got immigration from London, no doubt about it.
But if you don't provide for the housing, you don't stop people coming from London. People still come from London.
Yes.
It's just that they outbid the local people for their houses.
Sorry, you lost me slightly there.
Well, coming from London, a higher value area, higher incomes, they can afford to outbid people who already live here. They can still move here.
Yes, there's nothing to stop people moving here. I'm not suggesting it for a moment. I mean, London has a problem. Mm-hmm. We have already taken steps to solve a bit of it, quite well. The Maidstone's part of it. Maidstone's played its part already. It needs to be reviewed, and we would look forward to that review by 2022. Mm-hmm.
Wait until we've scuppered our rail service. That'll cure that.
No. At least haven't got Southern here, anyway. That'll deal with the problem once and for all. Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
As you said, obviously London's a very big city, one of the biggest cities in the world, some of the highest property prices in the world. And I know some authorities like Shepway and Thanet are actually encouraging that sort of movement, particularly in Thanet, trying to get sort of artisan types from London to actually move into, as you quite rightly said, there's a cheaper accommodation in Thanet to reinvigorate the economy of Thanet, and also it's happening in Folkestone as well, just as examples.
Ms. Cooling.
Moving off, population will be whatever the population is observed over the next few years, but it looks as if our local plan is heading to quite a conundrum, because as we touched on earlier this morning, we're either going to remain in breach of air quality, it will not be cured in the foreseeable future, or else we've got to say pause, etc., and we fail on OHN and 5 years housing supply. So how do we want this local plan to be illegal? Is it on air quality, or is it on failure to meet government policy? It cannot be legal on both.
Government policy is not illegal.
Oh, in that case, the answer is obvious. We ignore government policy. That's easy.
If you want unplanned development. If you want unplanned development, if you want more planning by appeal, as Mr. John was saying.
If I may, and it is only slightly facetious, if air quality is such an issue, and this coordinating team wasn't as alert to it as it should have been, and thank you again for putting this morning's session on. But if MBC subscribes to the Kent and Medway Air Quality Partnership and its conclusions on when applications should be refused, I just wonder what the huge danger is in having no local plan for a little while longer. The development is horrendous anyway.
Okay, so in terms of what we do with this review policy, then, so will the council draft some policy in text? Well, it's a revision, isn't it, of the? Yes. You have a policy. Well, the Speech 84 is what they proposed before, but this is going further than there are more matters covered now. Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a policy. I've only got this my agenda list from this afternoon. This list of matters I was reading out earlier.
And at 2.2, you've got, under review of local plan, a list of points there, and including the case of Leeds Langley. And
yes.
Those are the 3 points. So, in terms of what's moved on, we've got your identification of sort of, there's some headings for review, but the text for a proposed change is still as in PC 84, is it? That's not been superseded by any other.
Well, no, but it's essentially saying that it needs to be superseded because it doesn't cover the these points anymore. And but I think perhaps the crucial point is that whether you simply have a lot more text or you actually have a policy and what the policy says.
Well, it's our submission.
I mean, a policy that commits to a particular date would be a stronger matter than.
Our stance has always been that there should be a policy formally to deal with this matter.
Yes.
I mean, you may recollect, and if I may, sorry to encroach on your time, sir, but that I made submissions to this effect on day one of this examination. I also was covering at that time, as we indicated earlier, failure to cooperate. I don't repeat those submissions to you. Now, I understand from what you said earlier today that you're proposing to write to the Borough Council on that point. I assume we'll be copied in on that.
Yeah, well, there'll be, I mean, I'm hoping before Christmas to publish some interim findings, which will be generally available.
Obviously look forward to seeing what you say. The particular issue with which we're concerned is that, not that there should just be a review, but there should be an effective review of the plan. And the problem from the highways perspective, which is this perspective in which we're concerned, is that the plan period extends to 2031. However, the Joint Transport Board indicated it was only able to agree mitigation for development up to 2022. And for the period 2022-2031, as I understand from having heard them, the Borough Council rely on Mott MacDonald's interim transport strategy, which is something they produced independently, has not been the product of cooperative working. So for that reason, we say the plan as it is certainly lacks soundness, particularly in relation to the period.
That's on the basis that the duty to cooperate would require a duty to agree.
That's the duty to well, no, there's a duty to consult and to cooperate.
Yes.
But beyond that, the plan lacks soundness in relation to the period to 2031 because it's ineffective in relation to that period. So it's a soundness point as well as a duty to cooperate point.
I think the problem about this is I think this where the confusion has arisen, and that's been referred to again today, is between whether it's a period of mitigation or mitigation of particular developments. I mean, and I think that caused confusion earlier in the examination because saying that there's an agreed mitigation strategy up to 2022 doesn't address the point that the issue is with development in a particular location. So there's an agreement on, as far as I can see, on strategy for the borough except for South East Maidstone.
There is a geographical list.
And the time and the actual date of that period, apart from South East Maidstone, is not. There's no particular relevance of the date.
Well, the date is relevant to the extent that there's nothing agreed by the Joint Transport Board looking beyond 2022. There's a timing aspect. Yeah. There's also a geographical aspect in that it is obviously a matter that's focusing on South East Maidstone.
I mean, there's a logic to that if the South East Maidstone development occurs between 2022 and 2031. You know, and if that's what the plan said, that there's some logic to saying that.
The plan may or may not say that because we're not sure yet what form
Well, they
the
are. But,
recommendations are going to take, so I'm
yes.
anticipating that our case will be received favourably, and that is that there is no scope for development in that period at the moment due to the lack of agreed infrastructure. There's no mitigation agreed, so that's a timing point and a geographical area point. So in order to overcome that, because it's not met by the plan at the moment, in order to overcome that, there does need to be what I refer to as an effective review. And that's what we discussed when we raised the point on the first day, and you made your observations, which I've noted and you've noted. And what we've got is, in response to that, is this PC 84. And we've got your note today, but this is what the Council proposed to put in the plan. And in my submission, it's completely inadequate. It's inadequate because, firstly, and obviously, it's not a policy. It's simply some supporting text that's been put in there. If you have it to hand, sir, PC 84.
Yes, I do, yeah.
You'll see that it contains some textual passages that it proposed to introduce into the plan. Paragraph 21 of 27, just some general wording talking about what the plan can or can't deliver, and doesn't seem to have anything to do, actually, as a piece of text with any review or early review. Then when we come to possibility of a review or early review, 2131, all that says is that there are the three matters that follow in bullet points which would trigger the consideration of a review of the local plan or a partial review at an earlier date. So it doesn't actually, if those circumstances arise, doesn't actually oblige the Council to conduct an earlier review. It just simply says they must give consideration to it. And in my submission, that's not what's required in the circumstances of this case, where there is this deficiency in relation to the period and the area that we're concerned with. And there does need to be a comprehensive review, and there needs to be a positive commitment on the part of the Borough Council to conduct that review. And that positive commitment, in my submission, can only be signalled by making it a policy and not just some general words tucked to the back of the plan that no one will ever read and doesn't commit anyone to anything. And I do commend you to the decorum case of Mr. Justice Lindblom, where the problem was met, because our purpose is not, well, Mr. Jarman thinks from time to time that it may be, our purpose is not to scupper the plan or frustrate it, but we're putting forward a constructive suggestion that will enable it actually to be adopted as sound. But that's on the basis that this particular recommendation is accepted. In the decorum case, you'll have noticed, and this would something we certainly aspire to, that it was included as a major modification. It was dealt with in that serious way. And paragraph 14 of Justice Lindblom's judgment sets out the nature of that and how the Council in that case committed itself to cooperation and to review. And so what there needs to be, we say here, is a commitment in policy to a comprehensive review that will take account of comprehensive strategic modelling and identify...
Sorry, take account of...
Comprehensive strategic modelling and identify relevant mitigation options. This should be expressed explicitly. And, as I say, that's a matter that can only really be met by dealing with it as a policy and not as it is being put forward. So those are my submissions in relation to...
I mean, when we've looked at mitigation before, and the South has made some mitigation, and talked about the Leeds Language Relief Code, the issue comes up of when that could be delivered. And the County Council's best estimate was from 2027. And there's a significant risk of, that it could slip later than that, as road schemes tend to. In which case, it wouldn't be available for mitigation of South East Maidstone development, within the planned period. That's the risk.
If that was the situation, that would be the case. But, of course, we don't know that to be the situation.
Well, situation 2027. So, okay, at best you could get 4 years of development if it's developed in 2027, as Mr. Reid said. 4 years of development, and we've got some evidence that it's going to take rather longer than that to implement the South East Maidstone schemes that are already committed, so that there would be a shortfall in the amount of housing that could be available in the borough.
Well, that's preeminently a matter to consider in an early review.
But then you need to find somewhere else, and of a similar scale, which is also going to have, likely to have strategic infrastructure issues of one kind or another, if you're talking about that scale of development. And the options, the county was testing before, are developing new settlements outside Maidstone, all of which require, infrastructure.
The implications, but the key point is that these are matters that will be considered, we say, or should be considered, as part of by the Joint Transport Board carrying its work forward in a cooperative way in combination with the other authorities.
Except Joint Transportation Board doesn't seem to have that remit. It doesn't have a remit to consider development. It has a remit to only to consider transport matters. It doesn't have an air quality remit, as far as I can see. It doesn't have a development remit.
Sorry, obviously it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It considers what it has to consider, but it obviously has to receive information from elsewhere as to what it is that's proposed.
And it would weigh up deliverability when set against other transport alternatives. So that would all be fed into the mix of deliberations at that time.
But at the end, it isn't a decision-making body. I mean, it may be treated as such, but the decisions aren't ultimately for the Transportation Board. Okay. So, right. So essentially, what the County Council is asking for is that so it's in association then with a. I'm not quite sure what you do with the policy in that case. It do you take the South East Maidstone sites? Obviously, some are already permitted already, and so on. But the sites which don't yet have a final permission, you take them out of the plan, or do you keep them in the plan as for delivery later in the plan period?
Our view is they should be taken out of the plan.
Right. So there's that much less housing development in the plan. Ms. Cooling.
I think this is a helpful thought. I haven't got the latest trajectory, but I believe it's even more front-loaded than the one at page 291 in the submitted plan. But if one looks at 2020-21, there is a red line in here which shows that that at that point you are 500 houses ahead of the year by year target added up. So that trajectory, which is front-loaded, could be relaxed.
If you don't deal with the backlog, I mean.
Excuse me?
There's a backlog element in there.
This here, sorry,
yes.
This here, it's above zero. That could be flattened to depressurise some of the situation, let's say in the southeast and Maidstone, the northwest. That could be depressurised and rephased, and then subject to the review at that point, because we cannot predict, I think, where projection and housing requirements how they will look 4 or 5 years from now, given everything that is going on at the moment in this country. Well,
we're required to predict it, but whether the forecast is accurate or not is another matter. But we have to plan for the next 15 years.
Yes, indeed. And I don't know what it will do to the 5 years housing supply. I guess we breach it because the 5 years housing supply looks back to the period before this 928 was invented. But that is front-loading, which if we are allowed to breach, and you said it's not legal, but it may give developers an opportunity, but we've got air quality protections in large parts of the borough, so why don't we flatten and depressurise and review here? I
mean, not very much of that is actually H110. the H110 doesn't start for a year or two, and then only a small part of it is actually delivered in that period. But if you can't get a relief road, and assuming the relief road will be the answer, which is questionable in itself, but if you can't get the relief road in the next 5-year period either, then you're deferring even further down the road. In the meantime, you're not getting the mitigation which some of the H110 other developments would be paying for, such as the Junction 7 works and the other junction works which they're proposing. And so congestion would get worse in that respect, even without the development.
If I may, the new homes bonus, which is going to be sitting in the capital account, I'm guessing it'll be by then 20 million. I'm guessing it could actually, I don't know what the capital account can be used for, but there is money somewhere or other in the borough.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, just come back to it then. So the bottom line is the County Council saying that they want the remaining developments, the South and South East Mason developments, out of the plan. So that's the 3 sites at off Sutton Road, plus the Bolton Lane and the other sites the County Council has objected to. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So that and so they're out of the plan, and if they're to be contingent upon implementation of mitigation later in the plan period, then they can't come forward until that mitigation is available, which would be at the earliest 2027. If that's what is relying on the relief road, and if there's other mitigation, which I haven't heard about, if it's a sustainable transport mitigation, I haven't yet seen what that might be, other than the schemes we've already been talking about. Well, maybe later. So do you put
it could be 2027, not necessarily would be.
No. Yeah. So that's okay. Right. Okay. And you couldn't stay in as a broad location, say, because you don't have enough confidence that in the mitigation being available in the period. I'm just trying to think, if there's any other way that it stays in the plan, which fits your objection. I mean, if say you said, for example, we won't have South East Mason in as an allocation now. We'll have it in as a broad location for the last 5 years of the plan period, for example. But then that assumes you're going to be able to come up with a mitigation scheme, or that the relief road will be, the case will be successfully made and funding will be identified and all those other things.
Yeah, I think until we have certainty regarding strategic forms of mitigation, then clearly the confidence levels are low.
And if the plan is adopted with the South East Maidstone development, is County Council saying that you won't, in those circumstances, implement the mitigation which the developers and the Borough Council have proposed, including the bus party and those other matters, and that you'll just basically have to put up with the congestion that arise and wait until relief road or something else is done afterwards.
Within that scenario, clearly, we have to work with the Borough Council to achieve the most effective mitigation that we can do. I think the situation regarding the bus lane on Sutton Road, we obviously is well rehearsed within this inquiry, but it's not something that the County Council would sanction. But aside from that, we would have to work with the borough.
Okay. Ms. Cooling?
It's a general question, because it strikes me there needs to be a lot of cooperation in the future, both with neighbouring authorities and between Kent and NBC. I believe, I may have got this wrong, but I believe this morning you said that you felt, or you were reminded, that NBC had carried out the duty to cooperate in a legal sense. Our team has struggled to see how NBC has diligently kept to the duty to cooperate. We really have struggled. As you know, freedom of information requests, what we found from that. So, in a sense, I think we welcome, for our education, your report, perhaps putting a few bits of flesh on how you think or how you believe, and I'm not saying it's wrong, that NBC has cooperated in the legal sense, on your views on where they have not cooperated in the illegal sense or in the moral sense. So legal fine, but surely cooperation is meant to go beyond the letter of the law. It is meant to be the spirit of cooperation for the good of all residents across the boundaries. We just do not see that's happened. In a narrow sense, a very important sense, the NBC, KCC cooperation, and I don't want to apportion any blame, but it hasn't been exactly uplifting. So I think we need to understand, for our good going forward, is duty to cooperate deployed in a legal sense good enough? And if so, how is it legal? What has it done to just get over the legal hurdle? And maybe what more should it have done, the borough have done, to actually enter into the NPPF spirit of the duty to cooperate? Thank you.
I mean, the distinction I made is between the, I say, the legal duty, I mean, the things they've done, the fact that there is a joint transportation board, the fact that there was a lot of joint modelling work and so on commissioned through the process of the plan. It's only, as far as I can see, it's only kind of fell apart in 2015 with the disagreement on interpretation of results and modelling results and disagreement on the specific matters, specifically in the implementation of specific matters, where there's disagreement. Now that doesn't mean that they haven't sought effective cooperation. It means that the outcome has been potentially affecting soundness, because there's questions arise of whether what is now proposed in the plan is going to be effective and in accordance with the various soundness tests and things, and whether the modifications are needed, or whether plans are held as unsound, and all the things that flow from that. But the problem is to say that you can only comply with duty to cooperate if all the parties in that agree on all measures just gives everyone a veto essentially on anything that happens to the plan, and that's not what the duty is intended to do.
Absolutely fair and absolutely understood. I think we'd be very grateful in the report, though, to understand this legal discharge, and also looking forward, the dialogue, not necessarily the agreement, but the dialogue with Tunbridge and Malling, Ashford, etc., as well as the Highways Authority, must be critical for our borough, especially looking forward to this April 2021 newly adopted update.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, personally, I think the main disagreements started when we allocated, obviously in draft form, H110. But just going back to the review, as I said, we accept that as a policy, and I think it's the bullet points you set out are, I think, very useful to form the spine of a explanatory text. But just going back to the review, and sorry to ask this again, my understanding is that in the southeast of Maidstone, that through the local plan process, that everything stops in the southeast until such time as a Leeds Langley bypass is built. And that, as I understand it, the earliest that could be completed is 2027. And obviously, it's very seductive for Kent County Council because they control that, being the Highways Authority. But as Mr. Coolins made a very good point earlier, just in terms of growth around Maidstone, of course, what is looming is the Tunbridge and Moorlin plan. And it may well change, but at the moment, dare I say it, there's a significant amount of housing being promoted, if I can use that term, just outside of Maidstone to the west. And, lots of people, rightly or wrongly, have complained about the level of development on the Maidstone side of the border. So I think in anybody's book, I don't think anybody's saying there's not problems of congestion and therefore air quality. So is KCC's view again a moratorium on both sides of the border until there's this strategy, as Mr. Wright calls it? Because otherwise it's very inconsistent. There's something different about the southeast compared to the northwest.
Mr. Wright. Yeah, no, Mr. Wright.
The constraints in the southeast are that much greater. Well, they are. The evidence is telling us that. And for that reason, we've taken the view that strategic forms of mitigation are required and that development in advance of that mitigation would be premature. Now, the approach in the northwest, in terms of what happens over the border in Tunbridge and Moorling, is no different, in that if development should come forward in that area, we will need appropriate mitigation to accompany that development. It's a very similar approach.
I think we'll have to share with you, unless you disagree with us, Mr. Wright, the amount of traffic that use the top end of Hermitage Lane, and Highways England have strong concerns about that because it's feeding into Junction 5. The bottom of Hermitage Lane around the fountain, that's been a congestion black spot since certainly I've come to Maidstone. It's got very high levels of air pollution. But the amount of housing we're talking about in the northwest on the Tunbridge and Moorlin side and the Maidstone side is actually greater than the southeast. So have you objected to the Reg 18 local plan? Has Barbara Cooper written to Tunbridge and Moorlin saying no development in the northwest until there's a strategy and a strategic solution?
Well, we're working with Tunbridge and Moorling on their plan at the moment. We haven't objected to any particular sites. I think the key issue with Tunbridge and Moorling there is we're working with them on strategic transport mitigation that can be put in. Those sites are much more closely related to the strategic highway network, the motorway network, and we have a lot more confidence that the transport schemes can be provided through the development sites and the nearby junctions can be improved. And we have confidence at the moment that they can be progressed.
So sorry, then the simple answer is no, they haven't objected at all. If we go, in my opinion, quite a significant development, land north of Maidstone General Hospital, east of Hermitage Lane. I think, looking at my development manager, as part of the Section 106 agreement there, there's over £450,000 for public transport improvements. I can't remember when the appeal was, but it was probably about 2 years ago now. What action has been taken to actually come up with the improvement measures that you're referring to, Mr. Joyner?
Well, the design works are progressing with a view to implementing the schemes next financial year.
Can you give me the details of the bus route? Because that's what the 450, I think it's 470,000 was intended for.
I don't have details of the bus loop.
So in the northwest, no objection, no action.
Sorry, I don't have details of the bus loop because I'm relatively new to the role. I'm happy to find out and let you know, sir, as part of this review process.
Yes, Mr. Cooling.
The first part of my comment, I must declare that I'm chairman of Teessum Parish Council, which is to the west of the borough. But Rob Jarman has been driving in hard on Hermitage Lane, and with my Teessum hat on, I must say that I think you'll find some very interesting traffic flows there, as well as some quality exceedance areas which are influenced. But then with my coordinating team back on, if I may, this is where, at Rob's request, we did write to Tunbridge and Malling, because it's their issues and options paper. I don't believe it's Reg 18 stage yet. And so we are likely to get involved as a team there. And we note also that your chief executive has written, which in a sense we thought was a little bit rich, because presumably we would say, wouldn't we, if duty to cooperate had been exercised rigorously, diligently and properly, then that letter should not have been necessary. So we watch that space.
Right. Okay, I'm going to draw this to a close now. So just as an action point then, the NBC will draft a policy and reason justification. On plan review. Okay.
So can I raise a fairly short point?
Yes.
Well, two actually. One is it's nice to agree with the concerns that Mr. Jarman expressed then. We are very worried about Hermitage Lane. We don't often agree with him, but this is a real problem. If Tunbridge and Malling go ahead and build up from Barming Station up towards the A20, those people surely will think that they are in Maidstone. If you ask them where you live, they'll say Maidstone, not Tunbridge or Tunbridge and Malling. So the real issue, and it's been right through this whole inquiry, is the location of the boundary between Maidstone and Tunbridge and Malling. I don't know how you change boundaries. I don't know whether the Boundary Commission has any influence in that way at all. But that certainly needs revising to, if it is at all possible, and I'm sure it's not in
that's outside my powers, I'm afraid.
Having said that, one concern I do have, we talked about duty to cooperate. But if you look at paragraph 160 of the NPPF, it says quite specifically about employment sites, work with, not cooperate, work with the County Council and the adjoining authorities. And that's an area that simply hasn't happened. And it's very important because we, as has been well expressed before, we're desperately keen that junction 8 from the motorway is kept clear. It's a nice rural entry gateway into Maidstone, and we don't want it trashed, which is what will happen. Certainly we don't like offices there, which is currently being promoted, we believe, because offices only go there if they can employ people from the whole of Kent, not from Maidstone. Some will be from Maidstone, but very much a minority. But I would take the opportunity to say that those two things. One, the boundary, if it's can be considered to be changed, and Lord knows how it's done, even if it's possible to be done, is one thing. When we had the South Eastern Plan, they started to bring sub-regional areas in, which were not related to the county councils and the layout. So that something is possible. But that employment one, Junction 8, is very important to us that it's kept clear. And this failure to work with the local authority and the county council is a lamentable fact.
Or perhaps instead of lobbying for boundary change, you start lobbying for unitary authority, and then might...
They could have worked on both plans together. There should be one plan between Tunbridge and Malling and Maidstone. Okay. Leave it at that.
Okay, we can take a break now. That concludes that session on the review, and then we'll have some time on this revised monitoring session. But thanks very much for coming.
And that's where we disappear.
Yes. Okay. So just adjourn until 4:10.